Welcome, everyone. As you enter in, we welcome you to yet another in the fourth series of webinars hosted by CCC, Cross-Cultural Communications. We are the only national training agency in the US for community interpreting, but we know we have hundreds of visitors from all over the world coming in. I am Marjorie Bancroft, pleased to host Jeff Stafflund, who is your, I forgot to ask you how you pronounce that, Jeff?
That's correct, Stafflund, yes.
Oh my goodness, that was a good guess. From Winnipeg, we actually have an international speaker today from my native country. As Marjorie Bancroft, I'm hosting you as the director and founder of Cross-Cultural Communications. We actually instituted this webinar series for interpreters near the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we will probably keep it going for the foreseeable future because we have found it very, very valued by interpreters. This is a really intriguing one that we're going to introduce you today in this Tools for Interpreters series. Jeff actually approached us to offer presenting it. We thank you for that, Jeff. The idea of sight translating emojis and these attendant little icons had not really occurred to me before, but it turns out it really is a phenomenon. It is dealt with by translators as well as interpreters. Jeff has chosen to specialize a little bit to this degree. He has presented on the topic before, and as a Manitoba certified interpreter, yes, Canada certainly certifies its interpreters, French to English. He is concerned with community healthcare and legal interpreting, and it comes up a lot in legal interpreting here in the US and potentially other countries. So without further ado, I'm going to be turning this over to Jeff's expert hands, and I think you're in for a treat today, everybody. Enjoy. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Marjorie, and welcome everybody. Thank you for allowing me to present this topic that's quite interesting. So I think I'm going to share my screen and get started so that we can get through the material. All right, emojis and chord interpreting. So I work here in Canada with chord interpreters a lot. I do a lot of chord interpreter training. And about a year or two ago, I was asked, or I was trying to think of a topic that would be interesting in and that we hadn't already covered. You know, we talk a lot about ethics. We talk a lot about this and that, new legislation, but this topic, emojis and chord interpreting, was something that I was seeing more and more in the news. So I thought I would prepare a little presentation on it. So I'm not an expert in the field either. I've just kind of been reading about it. And so hopefully what I've presented here will be useful to you. So why is this important to chord interpreters? So chord interpreters are often required to sight translate documents. And not just chord interpreters, could be medical interpreters as well, but we're focusing on chord interpreters right now. Text messages and emails are increasingly being used as evidence in court, and those documents may contain emojis. So it's an important thing for us to be aware of, even if you haven't encountered emojis in your work yet. So here's what I kind of propose as an outline. We'll go through some definitions. Then we'll talk about emojis and the law. We'll look at some specific cases from around the world, problematic emojis, and then we'll end off with some advice. There's not a lot of advice for interpreters right now, but we'll look at kind of what I was able to find, and hopefully that'll be helpful. All right, so let's get started. When I started this journey, I was not sure of the difference between emojis, emoticons, and smileys. So just in your homes or wherever you are, just try to think, okay, what are the difference between these terms? So I'll just give you a couple seconds if you want to write in the chat as well. What do you think the difference is?
I think you may have stumped them. Oh, they're starting to come in.
There we go. All right.
Yeah.
image, and the other using punctuation. Okay, those are some good things. Really, I don't know, no idea. Smiley, specifically faces, broader. Emojis originated in Japan, that's true, we'll see that. Good, okay, well, you were basically in the same place that I was when I started this. I had heard of these terms, but I really wasn't sure what the difference was. And disclaimer, the difference is not clear. So we'll spend a bit of time kind of defining what those terms mean before we even start looking at emojis, okay? So I looked at a couple of sites for definitions. So here are 3 definitions that I chose for emojis. One is from home.unicode.org, which is the website that if you're designing an emoji, you have to kind of go through to get permission to use. They have to kind of they have to give you permission to use that. So it says pictographs, pictorial symbols that are typically presented in a colorful form and used inline in text. And then I went to Antidote, which is a big dictionary that's used in Canada by translators. I don't know if it's used in elsewhere, but it's a very common tool we use here. And it defines emojis as one of a collection of small digital images that represent objects and emotions and are used in electronic communication, originating in Japan, as somebody said, in the 1990s. And then makeuseof.com defines an emoji as a pictogram, a small picture that can show anything from a smiling face to a mango to a cigarette butt. Okay, so I think the takeaway from those definitions is think picture. I think that's kind of the common theme in those definitions. All right, emoticons are, according to Antidote, an emoticon is a small symbol made with keyboard characters that resembles a face, used in electronic communication to represent emotions. And then makeuseof.com gives us some examples here. So it's a set of punctuation mark letters and numbers arranged to resemble a human face. Each emoticon is more or less universally understood and denotes a certain emotion or sometimes an object. So they give us some examples here. A colon dash capital D means laughing or a big grin, and so forth. All right, and then for those trivia buffs among you, Professor Scott Fallman, a computer scientist at Carnegie Mellon University, used the first digital emoticon on the morning of September 19th, 1982. It was a smiley face, okay? So if in case that question ever comes up in your conversation. So if emojis are images, emoticons are symbols with keyboard characters. Okay, so that's pretty clear so far. So let's do an emoticon quiz, true or false. So if you could just write this down informally at home. I'm going to quiz you on 5 different emoticons to see if you know what they mean. So semicolon closing parentheses indicates a wink, true or false. And you don't write them in the chat yet. We'll go through them at the end. And this emoticon indicates anger. True or false? This one indicates you have dirt in your eye. All right. The second last one, this one indicates the expression, my lips are sealed. And then the last one indicates that you've just had a brilliant idea. All right, so just look those over and see if they're true or false. All right, here are the answers. So the first one is true, it is a wink. And I think I use that quite a bit. I assume that you guys are using a lot of that as well. This one is false. It does not mean, what did I say it meant? I can't remember what I said it meant, but it means teasing or sticking out your tongue. This one does not mean dirt in your eye. It means that you're really sad or crying. This one is true. It means your lips are sealed. Oh, anger. Okay, thank you, Alina. So the second one, I had said it means that you're angry. And then the last one indicates a happy face with a halo, meaning I'm extra good and happy. It doesn't mean you've just had a brilliant idea. Okay, all right, so armed with that knowledge, on we go. All right, the last term that we're going to look at is smiley. And here's where it kind of gets a little bit confusing. Antidote defines smileys as images of a round face with two eyes and a curved smiling mouth. Okay, so we had said that emojis are mainly images. So one could say that maybe a smiley is an emoji. But then dictionary.com describes a smiley as a digital icon, a sequence of keyboard symbols, which is the definition for emoticon, or a handwritten or printed equivalent that serves to represent a facial expression. Okay, so as in those two examples. So, I mean, the takeaway here is that it is confusing because some of the definitions seem to overlap. So there's no shame in kind of being confused by those terms. All right, let's sum it up. So here's a quote that I thought might be helpful to us. Smileys are the ancestors of emojis. They were created in 1972. They have a round shape, two eyes, and a mouth. Emoticons, on the other hand, are symbols that are written using keyboard characters such as semicolon, closing parentheses. And then finally, emojis are all the symbols currently found on smartphones, tablets, computers, or social networks. Okay, so that's kind of the definition that we'll be going with here. So all the symbols currently found on smartphones, tablets, computers, or social networks. All right, now, again, for you trivia buffs there, the most frequent emojis since or as of October 2019 are as follows. So I'll just give you a couple seconds to read through those. I know I use most of them. I'm not sure if they've changed since 2020 or since 2019, but they probably have. So just take a look and see which ones you use. All right. And you can actually go to that Emojipedia, the address on the left, to the left of the screen, for an updated version. All right, what emojis aren't are texting acronyms. So LOL, ROFL, and the whole list there. That's not what we're talking about here. All right, so I bet you've already forgotten our definition of emojis. So I'm just going to remind you before we go on to look at emojis and the law. So quiz yourself. Networks, symbols, and tablets are the words I want you to use. So emojis are all the symbols currently found on smartphones, tablets, computers, or social networks. Okay, so that's just a reminder of the definition that we're working with. All right, now we've got that out of the way. Now we're going to take a look at emojis and the law. So the use of emojis in court decisions has exploded in recent years, especially in the United States, but also elsewhere. So there's a link that we're not going to be looking at here, but when you get the copy of this presentation, you'll be able to go in and look. Emojis often occur most often in cases where gossip or chat is a key source of evidence. So cases of sexual predation where the offender and the victim or a police officer exchange flirtatious or sexual jokes, often as a form of grooming. And I'll show you a case that involved that. Cases of discrimination in employment, cases of bullying, and contracts. So based on the articles that I read, and again, I'm not an expert in this field, but that seems to be the cases where emojis are often cropping up. All right, now why are emojis a problem in court? Emojis are subject to various interpretations. So, and the difficulty of their interpretation is reinforced by the fact that they display differently depending on the platform. Okay, so you can be using one platform, sending an emoji, but not realize that the person receiving your emoji will be seeing something different. In 2016 and 2017, there were still substantial differences in how online platforms represented the same emoji symbols. So this is kind of a tongue-in-cheek kind of image that I found quite comical. This guy is concerned by the fact that Google's burger emoji is placing the cheese underneath the burger while Apple puts it on top. So that's a topic for another presentation probably. But the important thing is to realize that these emojis display differently on different platforms. All right, other issues. Emojis are often visually quite small and they're hard to tell. In one of the examples I will be showing you, one of the emojis I didn't even know what it was. I thought it was a rat with an umbrella, but it turned out to be a wind chime. Anyway, so that's a problem. Sometimes some of them are hard to read. Many emojis look alike. The smiley faces in particular, you'll have very subtle differences, and they can be hard to interpret. And we generally assume that emojis are static, but they can be animated as well. So I've got an iPhone, which allows me to use emojis and to kind of tie them to the movements of my face, so I can make those emojis move. So they're complicated little beasts. All right, so let's take a look at some cases. So I'm just gonna, I shut off the chat function because it was covering part of my screen, but I want to think, if you were to get this email or this text with these emojis, what would be the tone? What do you think would be the tone of that? So I'll just maybe invite a few, some people, okay, so humorous, all right. Someone is dying, violence, friendly, okay, angry, menacing, conspiratorial, frightening, bored, okay, interesting, sarcastic, humorous. All right, so I'm interested, the people who think it's humorous, where is the humor in there? I can see kind of the threatening aspects, the word killing, but what is humorous about it? So Julie Master says, funny, killing it. Killing it means I'm doing awesome, okay. All right, but okay, so killing it, but the gun and the knife and the bomb don't, they fit in with that idea of I'm doing an awesome job? Depends on the context, yes, of course. Violence. Okay, well, interesting. We have some different interpretations here. Context is king, that's very true. We'll look at that. But for me, if I were to receive that, and again, it depends on the context, but it certainly has some menacing elements to it. It's not a happy message. So let's take a look at some of the details of this case. So this is a case that was from the United States in 2016. A 12-year-old girl was prosecuted for threatening her college in a message containing a series of emojis. They were considered sufficient evidence to initiate legal proceedings. The threat was ultimately deemed not credible, but according to a Fairfax County school spokesman, the student was charged with threatening a school and cyber harassment. According to the girl's mother, the message was actually a response to the girl's own harassment. So the court hearing was held in camera, so it's not known whether the girl was punished in any way. And then you have the link to that article. But anyways, so that's what happened. It was considered a substantial, or enough evidence, there was enough evidence to initiate legal proceedings in that case. All right, let's take a look at a second example here. Now, there are so many emojis in this that I had to kind of write them out. And this is the example where I couldn't tell, I wasn't sure what one of the emojis was. So I'll just read it out. So good morning, smiley, red face. And remember, we talked about the subtle differences. So this is not just a smiley face, but there's blushing cheeks in there, which may not be easy to see depending on the size of screen that you have. Interested in the house. And then we have a flamenco dancer, 2 women with bunny ears, a victory sign, a wind chime, a squirrel, and a bottle of champagne. Just need to discuss the details. When's a good time for you? All right, so let's say you're a real estate agent and this is a message you get from a client. How are you going to interpret that message? So I'll just let some of you, okay, Sulamid Whiteley says party time. Yeah, I mean, it certainly has a kind of a festive tone to it. House party. The deal is almost sealed. Yeah. Very interested. Okay, Tomoko says a little so-so. Ready to buy. Someone's addicted to emoticons. Yes. Yes, 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 I agree with that. Closing. Yeah, so I mean, I think you agree with me that there is certainly, there's certainly definitely interest in that house. All right, let's take a look at the details here. So this is a case from Israel in 2016. It was in a canceled real estate rental deal. A couple was ordered to compensate a landlord for approximately $2,400 US. The seller withdrew his ad, thinking that the deal was done, but the potential buyers pulled out. The court found this succession of emojis to indicate consent. Now, you may or may not agree with that. I'm not sure if that kind of thing would hold up in court. There would have to be, in Canada at least. I don't know in the US, but it seems a little stretched. But it got these buyers into trouble. All right, last example. Okay, now this one is a little bit more touchy. This is I don't know how you'd. It had to do with the Nexium lawsuit, and I'll give you the details in just a few minutes here. But so all mine, and it had to do with kind of sexual predation. All mine, and then a purple smiling devil. Okay, so there's not enough really context to say anything about that probably. So I'll give you the details. Okay, so this was the sex trafficking case against Nexium cult founder Keith Raniere. Or in that case, evidence was presented that on one occasion, Alison Mack, a cult member and actor who played Clark Kent's friend on the long-running Smallville, sent Raniere nude photos of other women members. Upon receiving the digital photos, Raniere sent her that text. Although the intent behind Raniere's smiling devil did seem quite clear, that emoji alone did not determine his guilt, but it did play a role. And I think he ended up being charged with something like 120 years of prison time. So, all right. So there you have it for the cases. So, and as many of you have already alluded to, context is very, very important. So here's a quote that I thought summed it up quite nicely. According to French lawyer Thierry Vallat, sending emojis is not harmless and can land you in court. A pistol icon alone will not be enough, but linked to other threatening elements, it clearly expresses malicious intent. All right, so just a little pop quiz here, and you can just, I shut that chat feature off again, I'll put it back. So how would you describe your emoji usage? A, you never use the darn things. B, I use them but only sparingly. I don't want to come across as flighty. C, I pepper my emails and texts with them. They add warmth and humor. And D, the Guinness Book of World Records has expressed interest in my usage. So I'm seeing a lot of Bs. Oh, a C just went by, a couple Cs. A, I have yet to see a D doing this presentation, but all right. So some of you use emojis quite, oh, there was a D that went by too quickly. I couldn't catch the name, but anyways, I'm probably a B as well. I think they kind of soften the message a little bit, but I don't like to use them too much. All right, interesting. So let's take a look now at some problem emojis. The pistol. All right, now this may not seem like a problematic emoji, but keep in mind that in the early days before 2016, 2017, the pistol was actually depicted as a real gun. So you can see how that might cause an issue, as we saw in the first example of the case that we looked at. And here's a really interesting kind of an encyclopedia that you might want to kind of bookmark on your computer. Emojipedia.org is kind of an exhaustive list of all the emojis out there. And if you come across an emoji that you don't know what it is, you can copy it and paste it in that website and it'll tell you what it is. All right, so if you click on that link, here's what you'll see. So I'll just read through the first, not the whole thing, but I'll read through the first kind of a couple paragraphs to get a sense of what the information is given. So a squirt gun, water pistol, used to spray water for fun. So they've really gone after that kind of fun toy meaning. On major platforms depicted as a green or orange toy gun with an orange tip and barrel pointed left, very specific. Google, Microsoft, and Facebook's designs include mounted reservoirs. And you'll see them in just a couple seconds. Originally depicted as a classic handgun, as a revolver or other pistol. In 2016, Apple switched its design from weapon to toy, and other major vendors followed suit by 2018. And I'm suspecting that it's probably because of all these issues of people misinterpreting the intent of the messages. Deprecated emoji sets or smaller platforms still display the emoji as a handgun. So, all right, let's take a look at what these emojis look like on different platforms. So quite a wide range. A lot of them look like toys. They're very colorful, but some of them, if you look at Joy Pixels, Emoji Decks, LG, those look like real guns to me. And then you have like the messenger type guns that look kind of the shoot 'em up cowboy movies. But you know, I think if you get a message and you get a toy gun as opposed to a real gun, or vice versa, your interpretation, that's going to influence your interpretation of the message. All right. And then I just wanted to, at the bottom of that page, if you click on that pistol page, this website also gives links to other interesting articles. So up to you if you want to get more information. It's a really, really interesting site. All right, another problematic emoji is the kitchen knife. So for obvious reasons, it's described as a knife with a long steel blade as a chef uses to slice meat or vegetables, depicted with a black or brown handle and positioned at a 45-degree angle, often with its point at the lower right. May be used for content concerning cooking or food preparation, but often represents various senses of cutting and stabbing. So there's a bit of ambiguity in that meaning, or in that symbol. All right, so here's how they manifest or present on different platforms. Nothing overly menacing or threatening, I think, but it would depend on the words that it's accompanying. Interesting. I don't know why the different angles, but all right. Well, I hope I'm not going too quickly through these, but we've got a number of emojis to see there. So the bomb, this one makes me laugh every time I see it. It makes me think of the Roadrunner because it's kind of like that cartoon bomb. It's a cartoon-styled bomb depicted as a black ball with a burning fuse, commonly used for various figurative bombs or explosions, a slang bomb, a home run in baseball or softball, excellent or attractive. So again, all this ambiguity, it depends on the context. Sometimes applied in context of war, weapons, or violence. Okay, and interesting trivia, earlier designs animated the bomb as exploding. So I've never seen one of those, but. All right, so let's look at how they display. Nothing really threatening here. They all look like cartoon bombs to me. But I mean, if you send a message like with a bomb, a knife, and a gun, the chances are that the receiver of that message may interpret it, as with a violent intent. All right. All right, the eggplant. Now this is, I don't know if you guys have, if you have Netflix, there's a series called The Circle, and it's a competition where people are placed in different apartments, and the only way they can kind of communicate with each other is through text messages and through this platform. And there's a lot of discussion. It's really fascinating from an emoji standpoint, because you see some of the competitors, you'll see them kind of writing a message to send to somebody else that they might be attracted to, and they'll put, they'll discuss, oh, I'm going to put this emoji here just to kind of send that message that I want. And then you get to see the other person's interpretation of the message, which can be completely different. So, and the eggplant comes up often in that show. So the eggplant is a long, bulbous, bright purple eggplant, or aubergine in British English, shown with a leafy stem. Interesting tidbit, considered lucky in Japan to dream of an eggplant the first night of the new year. It's widely used to represent a penis, which is why it can cause some problems. So let's look at how they display on different platforms. Not too much variation. They're kind of all, unlike the other symbols, they're all kind of in the same, at the same angle, facing the same direction. All right, the peach, which I don't know, I don't know if in the States if peaches look like that. To me, that looks like an apricot, but Canada is not well known as a peach growing country, although in BC there are peaches that are grown. The fleshy pinkish orange fruit of the fuzzy peach shown with green leaves and sometimes a stem. Thanks to its distinctive cleft, the emoji is most commonly used for buttocks. And in certain contexts, the peach emoji may refer to impeachment. All right, so there's a bit of a kind of a sexual connotation, or can be, to that emoji. So here's how they display on different platforms, and some of the platforms don't look like peaches at all to me. Like Emojidex looks like a pink grapefruit. LG is kind of, I don't know, it looks too red to be a peach for me. Could maybe be a nectarine or a tangerine. Anyways, interesting. All right, so now we've come to our last two emojis. We're doing okay for time. All right, so the unamused face. Now this is where things get a little complicated. So let's look at the definition. So it's a yellow face with slightly raised eyebrows, a frown, and eyes looking to the side, may convey a variety of negative emotions, including irritation, displeasure, grumpiness, and skepticism, as if giving the side eye. Okay, and it's not to be confused with smirking face, which is the last emoji that we'll look at. So there's a variety of meanings, possible meanings. Here's how they display on various platforms. Now, I don't know if you agree with me here, but if I look at the Microsoft depiction and Twitter, for example, those emojis look a lot more sinister to me than Emojidex, for example. Emojidex, that emoji just kind of looks sad and a little defeated. The other ones look clearly like they're angry. So the tone of, or the emotion conveyed by the emoji, they differ, I think. I think they differ from one emoji to the next. And then it depends on your mood too, how you interpret that. But you can see how these would kind of elicit different responses depending on who you're sending them to. All right, and then the last one we're going to take a look at is the smirking face. So it's a yellow face with a sly, smug, mischievous, or suggestive facial expression. It features a half smile, raised eyebrows, and eyes looking to the side, often used to convey flirtation or sexual innuendo. Not to be confused with unamused face, which we've just seen, which has similar eyes but a pouting mouth, and then apparently there are cat variants and probably other animal variants. And now their colors have changed as well, I think. On Snapchat, this emoji next to a contact denotes that this person snaps you frequently, but you do not often snap them in return. So there's a lot of meaning embedded in these emojis, or possible meanings at least. All right, so here's how this emoji displays on various platforms. And if I look at like Microsoft, that the tone or the emotion that kind of I get from that is more pleasant than, say, Emojidex, which is kind of, that one seems a little bit more devious. Like what's he up to? SoftBank seems, you know, he seems like he's just eaten his favorite flavor of ice cream and he's very happy. So really, really different, you know, subtle differences, but they really change the meaning. All right, so let's just kind of sum up here. And I'm just going to put the chat function back here. What connotations are associated with each emoji? So the knife. I think it's fair to say that it could connote violence. It could have a violent connotation or maybe irritation. The bomb, okay, depending on the context. you know, that could, you know, if like somebody's a bombshell, that's we're talking about their attractiveness. So that it could have a sexual connotation. It could also have a violence connotation. The gun, we've already looked at that, could be violence as well, or irritation. The peach, again, there's that sexual undertone representing the buttocks. Same thing with the aubergine or the eggplant. And then the second last one, the smirking face. That's more, it could be sexual undertones. And then the last one is irritation. And I suppose that one of the, everything is violence or sexual, yikes. Well, not everything, but yeah, there is a lot of those. And I think that's why these emojis cause problems. All right, so we come to the most important question here. What's a court interpreter to do? So what if you were asked to sight translate a text containing emojis? So I'm going to give you just a couple minutes and see what people come up with in the chat. What would you do? I hope I haven't stumped anybody. So, okay, so Sarah says, describe the emoji. Seek clarification. I would say I'm not an expert on that. Name the emojis as they came up in the text. Okay, well, that's a question. Would you know how to name some of these emojis? So some of the ones that we've looked at, yeah, but what about some of the other ones, or the ones with very subtle differences? Seek clarification, can't translate the emojis, not sure. Show the emoji, okay, that's a good point, keep that in mind. Literal description for each. Okay, so James Plunkett is gonna start describing every little single part of these emojis. I'm not sure if that would be practical. You know, what if there are 7 emojis like in that real estate image? That would take quite a while. Identify the platform. Okay, that's an important thing too. Ask for clarification. Let the trier of fact interpret it. Okay, that's really good. Okay, good. So some of you have kind of got the answers. I don't think there's a clear answer yet, but let's take a look at what I found. So I've just read some articles, and there was nothing kind of pertaining to interpretation as such, but there were some articles on advice for lawyers and judges, how they should deal with it. And I took some of the points that I thought would be relevant to interpreting. So if the testimony is read in court, emojis should not be characterized orally, but should be displayed. Okay, so ideally, I think you would have like something up on the wall with the original message in, like on the platform that it was sent on, and then probably the received message as it displays on the platform that it was received in. Okay, but don't attempt to describe the emojis or interpret their meaning. That's just a rabbit hole, in my view. Okay, and I'm not an expert, but I just think if there are multiple emojis, very subtle differences, you're not going to be able to do a good job of that. And you're not going to necessarily know. I mean, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of emojis. You're not going to know the exact names for each one. So as somebody said, leave that work to the judge and the lawyers. Good news is NAJIT has recently struck a working committee, like talking a couple years ago, to draft a position paper on the question. I checked yesterday and there's still nothing up, but hopefully that's coming, and that'll give us more clear guidance on what we should be expected to do. And some final thoughts. As emojis become more common, we will likely see continued references to them, as well as the emergence of expert witnesses who are engaged to testify as to emoji context, meaning, and intention. That may be some of you. Maybe I've sparked a passion in emojis and you'll become an expert in it. So be thoughtful of your emojis, because anything you write, post, or text may be used against you in a court of law. So a chilling way to end this webinar. All right, so now it's your turn. So Marjorie, I'm gonna step back and we'll do some questions now.
Yes, if you Jeff, if you wouldn't mind making yourself visible by
Sure, sorry, stop.
stopping sharing your, or more visible, I should say, obviously, larger, not quite larger than life. Far from the end of the webinar, I think you'll find there's some extremely interesting questions, some of which touch a bit on what you've discussed, but I think they're worth clarifying. One question, so Emojipedia tells you what it is, but does it list all meanings? Not necessarily the same thing.
Well, I would assume it's kind of like an encyclopedia. So it would certainly be a good source of information. Does it list all possible meanings? I don't know. I'm not sure, who answers those questions, who are the experts that do those write-ups, but it's certainly a good starting point.
Thank you. Was there ever an emoji or emoticon that looked like no threat, but caused a landmark lawsuit?
Well, that's a good question. Like to prepare for this, there's actually not a lot of material available on emojis and interpreting. And I gleaned through, I read as many articles as I could until they started kind of repeating themselves. And I didn't find any, like the examples I showed were the examples that were given in these articles. So I don't know. And I think it's still pretty new. So, as I think the most recent case that I talked about was the NXIVM case with the sexual trafficking. And that was just in 2019, 2020. So these are recent cases. So I think the field is kind of developing as we speak.
Oh, I'm sure. What about, I don't know if you address this because I'm constantly focused on the questions themselves, and so sometimes I miss what you say. But what about, someone's asking, what about the use of a group of emojis that may be interpreted in a way that may be aggressive, inappropriately sexual, romantic, etc.?
Well, as we saw in the first example, like the knife, the bomb, and what was the third one there? I can't remember what it was. A gun.
Yeah, I wondered.
Those three taken together, I think they just enhance the intensity. But I don't know if, really there, like I said, there's not a lot of research that I'm aware of on this topic. So that would be an interesting kind of thing to look into, clusters and how they, how emojis kind of impact and influence the interpretation if they're, beside other emojis. That would be an interesting field.
I think it's a very wide open field at this point in time. This one sure stumps me. If you use the Apple handgun, but the person who receives the images on Microsoft, what happens?
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't know if you're in Facebook and you're, although I don't know if you can send a message from Facebook to another platform, but if you're on a phone, if I'm on an iPhone and you're on some other type of phone, I believe that, I'm sending you an emoji that looks a certain way on my screen, but it probably displays differently on your screen. So, I think that's part of the problem too. You may think that you're sending a toy gun, but on this other person's platform, it shows up as a real gun and they interpret your message differently. So, but again, I'm not an expert on this by any means. I just kind of read what was out on what I could find on the web. So.
Absolutely. We're all learning with you. How can the legal system prosecute people for the real threat and not dismiss it as colorful free speech? Shouldn't it be some other element present, like stalking, real violence, intimidation? There's no imminent threat from the text message. You can turn off the phone, block the incoming messages, or change the phone email if someone is harassing you. That sounds like a legal question, not an interpreting question.
Yes, and I'm definitely not a legal, but what I understood from the articles that I was reading, and some of them were written by lawyers, is that emojis alone aren't enough to get a conviction, but they can be part of evidence used, to get, if somebody's stalking somebody, definitely those emails and those texts will come up in court. But it's not our job as interpreters either to kind of, I have no legal expertise, so I can't really answer that question.
Understood. Here are a couple of questions that seem to go together, and you've sort of addressed this, but more specifically focusing on the cultural piece. Someone says, I think the cultural element needs to be taken into consideration in interpreting. What are your thoughts on this? And B, can emojis, being a US creation, practically translate the same in all languages or depend on cultural meanings? Those two questions kind of connect. But the first one, do you think that the cultural element needs to be taken into consideration when interpreting?
Absolutely. And for any interpreting, right? Because when you're working through different, like with different language groups and different languages, culture influences our interpretation. I thought it was interesting at the beginning when I showed that first case with the gun and the knife and the bomb, and some people interpreted that as positive. And is that for cultural reasons? I don't know. Like, culture is definitely an aspect that you have to take into consideration in any form of communication. So emojis are just another way of communicating. And interestingly, I don't know that all emojis are like, I think emojis, I mean, they started in Japan. So I don't know if we can say that they're an American creation. And that, what was that website? Unicode.org. Anybody can submit an emoji and have it approved. So I'm not sure that's true to say that it's just a US kind of invention, but.
Gotcha. And you sort of have addressed this, but I'm going to ask it anyway for just absolute clarity. But is it our job to provide connotations or only describe the emoji?
Well, I wouldn't even describe in what I've read. You can't even describe the emoji.
Yeah,
like, so I would say,
saying,
if I had something up on the screen and I was asked to sight translate it, so I would sight trans blah 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 emoji blah 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 emoji. I wouldn't even go down that road. But we'll see. It'll be interesting to see what NAJIT comes up with, because hopefully they will give us a much more detailed guidance on what we should be doing.
Yeah, because someone else is asking right after that question, when sight translating emojis in open court, how will you identify them accurately? Would it be good to keep a list? And
yeah,
I don't think
you can. I mean, it's, unless they give you those in advance. But from what I've read is that you're not even supposed to try to characterize them. There's just too many of them, and that'll be up to the lawyers and the judge to figure out. And at the end of one of the last articles that I read talked about the emergence of this field of expertise. So they'll, courts will bring in experts on these emojis and how they should be interpreted. And so it's not really our job. We're not expected to do that, I don't think.
So you're saying that there's hope for the interpreter to be taken off the hook.
Relax is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Someone asks, what does the two hands together mean exactly?
Yeah, I don't know, because sometimes I think it's like praying, but sometimes it's like thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know. That would be one to go in and take a look at it on Emojipedia and see what they say are the different meanings.
I'll have to look, because I've narrowed it. I've seen it coming up a lot. I've narrowed it down to exactly those two in my own head. But now I know that there's Emojipedia, so thank you for that. And the same person asked, and two hands apart and like little drops in the middle. I've never even seen that one.
Two hands apart. Yeah, I don't know what that
little drops in the middle. Really?
I'm seeing the chat. Some people are saying that this means Namaste, and it can mean like a hand, like a hand check or whatever.
Yeah, interesting.
Could be that too, clapping. I don't know.
Very interesting. There are also likely generational changes to meaning. What about this?
I would think so. Yeah, I would think. I'm in my early 50s, and I'm sure that my interpretation of those are not the same. Is not the same as somebody who's in their 20s or even a teenager. So, yeah.
And this is interesting to me. Jeff, can you name some jurisdictions that are having court interpreters on the spot during a hearing sight translate text messages?
No, and I didn't come across any. I just thought it would be interesting. Okay. Like, I just felt like we needed to know more about the topic as interpreters, but I have never experienced, having to sight interpret something with an emoji in it. And I've never heard of any colleagues having to do that either. But it's good to be aware of how the legal field is evolving, and this is a phenomenon that we're seeing more and more. So,
yeah, and someone asked, should the interpreter at least note for the record the appearance of emojis in the text? And you have clearly answered that one. And someone has also asked, what if in other cultures emojis can be interpreted differently? You've really addressed that as well. What a mess it is. But how about emoticons, the ones made with keyboard symbols? As an interpreter, are you still supposed to know them and interpret them?
Oh, that's a good question, actually. I don't know. I would say, if I were to come across that, I would probably just label it as an emoticon. You know, that one you could describe more. You could just kind of go through the
Yeah,
punctuation signs.
yeah,
So I don't know,
yeah.
but there would still be the issue of interpretation in the larger sense. Like, what does that emoticon mean? And if it was a problem, that would be up to the lawyer and the judge
I was
to
about to say that's what they're
determine
paid
that.
for.
Yeah, I wouldn't even venture into that.
But you would consider actually interpreting the punctuation.
I would think so, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And we talked, I think I saw a little thing in the chat here about LOL.
yeah.
Those, you know, that wasn't the topic of this presentation too, but if you know what that is in English or in the language that you're interpreting into, then you, that's another question I'm just asking as I'm speaking, I'm going, should we even interpret that? Because LOL could mean something different than what we think it means. So I don't know, it's a bit of a can of worms.
It is. Just a side remark quickly, as a presenter, speaking to another presenter, I noticed you said the language you were interpreting into. And for a US audience, it's good that you didn't say target language, because that is the language you're interpreting into. But here in the US, I don't know about Canada, where you are, it has now been very widely taken by interpreters incorrectly to mean the non-English language. And I
Really?
have some concerns about the bias that is implicated in that sort of professional cultural switch of meanings, by the way. But by saying the language you interpret into, you avoided that whole problem. Thank you. For clarity purposes. Someone is complaining, and I feel their pain. Since emojis are not words but images, why do language interpreters need to worry about them?
Well, that's the question, is because they come up in written text, and because that's one of our jobs, is to sight translate. So it's good to know how to handle. Like if you got a message, you know, with one of these, with a couple of these things in there, what you would probably be thrown off if you weren't aware of this whole kind of phenomena, it might throw you off. So it's good to know about it. Knowledge is good.
Knowledge is good, absolutely. This is tough. What if a judge insists that you describe it if there isn't a screen available? Oh, the judge.
Judges are not perfect either, but I would probably just say, you know, I would. That's a good question. I mean, I usually defer to the judge. I mean, they're kind of the king of that little realm, and when you're in that room. But I would probably, because it's being recorded, I would probably say something that, you know, I would clarify that the judge is requesting this. This is not standard practice, but here is my attempt to, you know, to describe this emoji. I don't know if that's correct, but that's what I would probably do if I was put on the spot.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to be put on the spot that way by a judge. Someone is requesting, someone is requesting a list of the literature you surveyed in the preparation of this presentation. I would be interested in reading some of the articles you mentioned. And if it's not in the PowerPoint and there's anything that you wish to send, I should just add, and it's entirely up to you. There's no pressure, Jeff. But if there's anything you wish to send us before tomorrow around this time at the end of the webinar is when we actually send out the link to the recording, the link to your PowerPoint PDF that you've graciously agreed to share, and the link to their certificate of attendance. And we could also include anything that you might be interested in sending. But this is somebody who's specifically interested in the articles.
Okay. Well, I've tried to cite them as I go along. So you'll see there are links all the way through, but also the last 2 pages of the presentation are a little bit more. And I've added some of like when I went to update this presentation, I also kind of pulled out a few other articles that I didn't use in preparing the presentation, and I stuck them on that PowerPoint. So the last 2 pages of the PowerPoint slide contain the links that I looked at.
Excellent. This is an interesting question. How do you become an emoji expert?
Wow, I don't know. I mean, you would just read and read and read, but you mean like an expert so that you could give expert testimony in court? That I don't know. I think you would probably have to have like a university degree in it. You'd have to have looked at the phenomena, you know, in its entirety from the beginning, the development, and all the possible. You'd have to be more of an expert, much more of an expert than what I was as I went to prepare this presentation.
Absolutely. I think that goes beyond the interpreter's role, to put it mildly. Subject matter expert instead. You had mentioned, I think, medical at the beginning. Someone is asking, what about in the medical field? Have you had any cases?
I don't do a lot of medical interpreting. I have done medical interpreting, but I would assume that anything, like I'm just trying to think of where you would see that type of documents, maybe like psychologists or psychiatry or something like that, where they're looking over people's writing. But I think the strategy would be the same. It would be the interpreters. It's not the interpreter's role to kind of assign meaning to those emojis. I think it would have to be, you'd have to have a conversation with the psychologist or the care provider saying, this is a field of expertise that I don't have, and kind of work with them to see how they want to go about it. But I think the strategy would be the same, kind of hands off. This is not my area of expertise. I'll help with whatever I can, but they need to get that knowledge as well. If they're using emojis to assess their patients, well, they better know what they're doing, I would think. But
yeah, I mean, there's a comment here, and it's not actually in the Q&A, it's in the chat. Many times I had to ask the person texting to use complete words to avoid problems, but in court, this is a written record. I'm not quite sure how that would be happening live, but in medical or 911 calls, which interpreters are being asked to sight translate text back and forth in 911 calls. That's the emergency. Yeah. Is that the emergency number in Canada? I should know. I'm from Canada.
Yeah, 911.
Okay.
But
yeah, the emergency number.
Are people able to, now this is something I'm not aware of, but can you text a message to 911? Is that?
Yeah, this is a relatively new phenomenon, and imagine like you've got a domestic violence victim huddling in a bathroom that she's locked the door, and her abuser is trying to break the door down to get to her.
Wow. Okay.
And she's scared to speak out loud. So that's why 911 has set up texting capabilities. And so some of the large service providers for remote interpreting here have actually engineered it so that they can provide interpreters who can sight translate the text to the dispatcher and back.
Wow.
That's kind of a new skill for interpreters, right?
Wow. Okay.
And so in that context, I could see this happening, because then those become records. Those text messages could potentially become records in a court case. And the interpreter is doing this live, and there's no way out, right? So in medical context or emergency context, unlike a court, then I could see what this person is. I mean, it's not really a question, it's a comment. Many times I had to ask the person text me to use complete words to avoid problems. But is that you think outside court that might be a reasonable strategy?
Well, I don't know, but I'm thinking like the 911 dispatcher would see that same message as well, right? And they would have to.
But if it's coming in Spanish, if it's coming in Cambodia, I mean.
So they wouldn't see the original text; they would just have the interpretation.
If they could see it, they would not understand the context that the emoji was coming in.
No, oh my goodness!
Okay, I mean, how good is your Cambodian, right? I mean.
I have no idea.
Your Hmong is actually what I'm referring to typically for the Cambodian languages, most common. So it
is a very complex issue. Yeah, I have no idea.
Oh, and someone is adding, by the way, emojis, and I'm looking at the time, but I just want to mention it. Emojis are used in the medical field to describe degrees of pain. So I had forgotten, but that actually is true. But I lost track of time precisely because this was so fascinating. You have garnered an enormous number of grateful comments and appreciative comments throughout and to the end. We're very grateful to have had you, Jeff. It was just as I predicted. It was a lot of fun. It was a really interesting topic, but actually it turns out to be an important one. So huge thanks for your presence and for your willingness to provide this information, this valuable information to hundreds of interpreters. We wish you
You're welcome.
a wonderful rest of your day.
All right, well, take care, everybody.
You too. Thank you. Bye for now. And for those of you who are still on, you may know that there's a bit of a tradition at CCC that I stay on as the host, as the director and founder of CCC, to answer any general questions, whether it's about something as simple as your certificate